I was born in Toccoa, which is also a Cherokee word for the beautiful. It's a small town, so you see everybody, especially from middle school through high school, almost every day.
Sean Scott grows up as a devout Southern Baptist in the small town in Georgia where his parents meet in 1973.
My mom got pregnant, and they got married out of a sense of obligation to their Christian faith. They got divorced, and my mom met Don the next summer. The gentleman that I call my dad, Don Scott, adopted me in 1981. And I always felt like he dearly loved me. Dad never made me feel any different from the rest of the Scott family.
Don marries Sean's mother, and 8 years later, Sean's half-brother Daniel is born.
When I was very little, Sean and I were very close. He was my childhood hero. Sean was this rock star. Everyone knew who he was, everyone liked him, everyone was always wanting to talk to him. He was on the football team. That was the #1 football team in the state for many years. I wanted to do nothing more than to be Sean.
As he nears his junior year, Sean starts thinking about his future. He has huge aspirations for college, but his mom is an artist, and his stepdad is retired from the Navy.
And both my mom and dad sat me down and said, look, son, we're concerned that if you're going to go to college, you're going to have to figure out how to finance it yourself because we don't have the means to help you. So I started looking for all the schools that had cheap tuition, and then I landed on the United States Military Academy at West Point. And tuition per semester was $0. I'm like, wow, that's going to be easy to afford.
But West Point is the most prestigious military academy in the country and extremely difficult to get into.
So I spent a lot of time from 10th grade on in the guidance counselor's office. That's how I came into Trish Ellis's circle of awareness.
Trish Ellis, a bookkeeper at the school inside the guidance department, is the wife of a prominent pharmacist in town and the mother of Wendy Ellis.
Wendy was very outgoing and friendly, smiling all the time. She was a cheerleader.
I do remember Trish Ellis, Wendy's mother, being very, very much supportive of Sean. I believe that she saw that that would be very promising for her daughter.
Trish stops me one day and says, hey, Sean, Wendy is struggling in algebra. Do you mind tutoring her? And we'll be happy to pay you. I'm like, I'll do that for free. I'll pay you to do that. Wendy pretended to be struggling to learn and not be able to understand it. She would bat her eyes at me, which really excited me. I was just mesmerized by the radiant blue eyes that she had. I really enjoyed the interaction with Wendy.
During the last semester of his senior year, Sean notices that Wendy is absent from school.
I passed Trish's office and I said, hey, Trish, I haven't seen Wendy in school in like 2 weeks. Is she all right? And she says, oh, well, it's pretty sad, but she's in the hospital down near Atlanta for a eating disorder, bulimia, and anorexia.
Sean decides to show support for Wendy and visits her.
When I came in, she looked pitiful. When she saw me, she just lit up. Her eyes got wide. She said, Sean, you came to see me. And that just got me right there. It's probably the initial seed that made me ask her to go with me to our senior prom.
Sean is delighted when Wendy recovers and agrees to go to the prom with him.
The night before my prom, I got home and there was all this paperwork laid out. There's a set of orders with my name on it, and there's instructions to coordinate travel to West Point. I was so relieved. The next afternoon, I picked up Wendy. We took pictures, and then we were off to dinner, and then to the high school gymnasium.
The news of Sean's acceptance into West Point spreads throughout the dance.
Herb and Trish Ellis were chaperones, and they looked like they were overjoyed. Wendy said, "Oh, everyone is so proud of you, and I love you so much." You know, that night, I probably said I love you so that she would kiss me again.
Sean and Wendy grow closer, but once he's at West Point for his freshman year, Sean's schedule is regimented from sunup to sundown.
We were busy. Every time we went to the payphones for the privilege of a very brief phone call, my number one priority was to call Wendy. My second priority was to call my parents.
Wendy tells Sean she is still struggling with her eating disorder, but being in New York makes it hard for him to help her back home in Georgia.
When I was home on leave, Wendy asked me if I would go to one of her psych appointments. I was wholly and consciously aware that Wendy had long-term mental health challenges.
I believe that the protective nature of Sean would draw him to try to help someone like her. She's beautiful, she's well-known, the family's well-known, she has a problem, so naturally a protective person like that would want to try to shelter that person and help fix them.
At West Point, the years in the calendar seem to fly by, but every day seems like it's an eternity. So, in order to help make the experience tolerable, there are a series of milestone events that include a speech, a ball, a dinner, and one of those is called 500th Night.
The event takes place during Sean's junior year, and Wendy's parents drive her from Georgia to New York to celebrate.
They allowed Wendy and I to have some private time alone. Wendy and I enjoyed a wonderful night, and I was really excited and proud to show off my girlfriend from my hometown. It was just like a night of joy and excitement.
With only one more year till Sean's graduation, the future looks bright if they can get a handle on Wendy's health issues.
One day we were out shopping together, and she just fainted right there in the store. She refused to have an ambulance called. She said that she had diabetes. I had no clue she had diabetes.
Wendy Scott is a very manipulative woman, and she's very dangerous.
She craved attention and affection from others, and she went to any length to get that.
Now I don't know what to believe.
Sean Scott is at West Point when he finds out that his girlfriend Wendy has another serious health complaint.
When I found out that Wendy had diabetes, I was very concerned for her health. She told me that the insulin that she had, she did not get from a doctor. Her father got it from his pharmacy that he worked at and gave it to her. Only once did I actually see her inject herself with insulin. I loved her, and I wanted to be a support to her and to help her in any way that I can.
Sean seemed happy with Wendy. but there was always something about her that made me feel uncomfortable. There was just always that little feeling in me that just made me feel unsure about her.
By Sean's third year at West Point, his relationship with Wendy has evolved. However, he suffers a devastating loss in his family in April 1996 when his stepdad becomes seriously ill.
I made it home on emergency leave from West Point just in time.
I remember Sean opening the door to the ICU in his uniform from West Point and running through the ICU to my father's side. And then I was taken out of the room, but I remember looking back and seeing Sean sitting there holding his hand.
I was holding his hand when he took his last breath. And I held on to it until I felt, the warmth leave.
The next year, Sean's stepdad's absence is felt at his graduation from West Point. But Sean is able to celebrate with Wendy and family.
My mom, my brother, Herb, Trish, Wendy's grandparents came and attended. I was full of pride and exuberance. And people in my hometown that were there, I was going to get to shake hands with the President of the United States. It was just a great day all around.
A few days later, Sean and Wendy drive from New York to Georgia to elope, without family present.
Wendy and I got married in a tiny little chapel on June 3rd, 1997. My best friend Joe was my best man, and he brought along his wife. Wendy was over the top. She acted as if she was about to faint. She did not focus on me. She had a hard time getting through her vows. So that part was kind of bizarre. We had made plans for a honeymoon, and we drove straight through the night to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Wendy was not interested in any physical intimacy, and she said that she was feeling physically ill, and that was a great disappointment. But to me, that was not as important as abiding by my vow to love, cherish, and care for her in sickness and in health. I was okay with that because there are higher priorities than my own carnal satisfaction.
A year later, in 1998, after taking the U.S. Army Engineer Officers course, Wendy and Sean moved to Columbia, Georgia, just a few hours from home.
My first permanent duty station in the Army was Fort Benning in Georgia. And we went and did fun things by ourselves and with other people, my West Point classmates included.
Later that year, Hurricane Mitch devastates Central America, and Sean is deployed as part of the Army Corps of Engineers. When Sean returns to Fort Benning, he finds Wendy in a health crisis.
Wendy had gotten a referral to an oncologist because there were some irregularities in her blood work. She told me, "Oh my God, Sean, what if I have cancer?" And then the oncologist broke the news to me that he felt, in his professional opinion, Wendy had leukemia. I couldn't believe it. It was just another shock. I never shaved my own head, but I helped her shave hers. I rarely cried. I definitely cried tears that dripped on her head while I was helping her shave it. She was so grateful, and we had intimate contact that we hadn't had in months or maybe even in years at that point.
Wendy tells Sean that she wants to do the treatments on her own, so as not to distract him from his work.
She said, "I've found a specialist that can treat me right here at the hospital. You can just drop me off in the morning, and then I'll find a ride home." While she was going to chemotherapy, there was less strange behavior, and all the other antics faded away.
Wendy starts her treatment, and Sean believes that all is going well, until one day, he is summoned to a meeting with some other Army spouses at Fort Benning.
It was a historic home of a colonel, and Wendy was sitting there, and she looked up at me, had a very nervous look on her face, and was very fidgety. You could hear a pin drop. One of the spouses said, "We have discovered that Wendy does not really have cancer. She's been lying to us, and we've all been deeply hurt by this." I couldn't say anything. I was filled with rage.
Second Lieutenant Sean Scott has been told by a group of Army spouses that his wife Wendy is faking having cancer.
I was just devastated, embarrassed. I felt sick to my stomach. I couldn't say anything except thank you for bringing this to my attention. I am so sorry that this happened. I learned that one of the church community saw her at the hospital. She just walked around like a normal person, and she wasn't behaving like she would behave at church, where she would present as if she was deathly ill and unable to perform activities of daily living on her own and needed help.
But how did Wendy trick her oncologist into a leukemia diagnosis?
I was finally coming to grips with an escalating pattern of behavior. I believe Wendy figured out how to manipulate her body so that her blood work came back such that more than one medical provider was convinced that she had leukemia.
He had worked very hard to get to where he was, and he had a very promising career ahead of him. The situation that she put them in could very much damage his entire career.
I was committed to her because I considered marriage my bond with Wendy and with God. And I wasn't going to give up on that, and I was determined not to get a divorce. I decided that I was going to monitor and control her behavior as best I could.
For the next 2 years, Sean focuses on the demands of his career and spends less and less time with Wendy. In April of 2002, he is notified that Wendy is in the ER because of a complication related to her diabetes.
The physician on call was present. After the whole cancer thing, I knew from then on that she was faking. She found some new docs who didn't know her backstory. I said, "Look, doc, I respect what you do, and I just want you to know that I know without a shadow of a doubt that my wife does not have diabetes. Never had." He paused, looked at me in the eyes for a second and said, "Okay, would you like for me to put her on a 72-hour hold?" I came in and told her she was going to a psych ward, and she was livid. She was throwing objects at me. She was yelling at me.
And Wendy has one more bomb to drop.
A nurse came in and said, "We got your blood results. Wendy was pregnant."
On December 13th, 2002, Sean and Wendy's daughter is born with hydrocephalus, a condition that will require multiple surgeries.
When our daughter was born, Wendy's behaviors regarding her own health just disappeared. It was like magic. I found out that I was deploying. I was amped and energized and excited to exercise my leadership in the role of company commander.
Sean is deployed to Kuwait, but gets emergency medical leave to return to the U.S. in March 2004.
I was back in the States in Chapel Hill, North Carolina for the first of a series of brain surgeries for our daughter at a UNC medical center. My personal belief is that the hydrocephalus condition, which was diagnosed as Chiari malformation, was congenital. In 2004, my daughter began developing symptoms from vomiting to abnormal eating behavior to constant diarrhea.
Sean is now stationed at Fort Detrick, Maryland, so that the family can be close to Walter Reed Medical Center, where their daughter is a frequent visitor.
The doctors were unsure as to what exactly was wrong. They were pursuing the option of leukemia, and they were doing everything that they could to help her.
Over the next 3 years, Sean and Wendy pull closer together. Wendy is no longer faking health issues and gives birth to a son who is underweight but otherwise healthy. At Walter Reed, the doctors cannot determine the cause of Sean's daughter's ongoing symptoms.
My daughter underwent hundreds of diagnostic procedures. The spinal tap, that's an extremely painful procedure, and it was gut-wrenching, heartbreaking to be present and in the room with her.
In June of 2007, Sean gets a call from Wendy.
There's going to be a multidisciplinary team meeting. So all the specialists, along with the primary care manager, meet in a room with the parents, and one of the lead GI physicians laid a bombshell. There are levels of magnesium in your daughter's system that I cannot account for. So that tells me that either you pointing at me or you pointing at Wendy or both of you have been giving your daughter magnesium of some form. And Wendy confessed on the spot. I did it, and I looked at her in front of all these people. All I could say was, how could you?
The place that you have to be mentally to do something like that to an innocent little child, you would have to be.
Sean Scott's 4-year-old daughter has undergone dozens of medical procedures for various health issues since her birth. His wife Wendy has now admitted to poisoning her. The state takes custody of the Scott children.
Anger doesn't even come close. It's more like rage. I was shocked, stunned, sickened, saddened. I drove Wendy home, and she cried, and she blabbered on to me about how we still have to stick together as a family. I just looked at her and I was like, will you shut the up? Or I was gonna wreck the car and kill both of us.
In June 2007, I received a call from Fort Detrick advising me that they had just received a call from Walter Reed and they believed they had a child abuse case. They advised that the mother of the child had been confronted by the doctor and actually admitted that she had been poisoning her child and that she was withdrawing blood from the child as well. I knew about Munchausen by proxy, what they call it today, fictitious disorder by proxy. And immediately it triggered into my mind that I may have one of those cases. In a Munchausen by proxy case, the person themselves is Munchausen. And they cause their own illnesses or injuries to gain attention. And normally it's when they can't get attention for themselves anymore that they move on to a child.
Agent Smith calls FBI headquarters to talk to a profiler.
I knew that I was going to have to approach this interview differently. The behavioral analysis profiler told me to make the interview completely about her, to not talk about her children and the things that she did to the child, but to talk about how it affected her and how it made her feel. Just focus the entire interview on Wendy. I walked in, the chaplain was there, and Wendy Scott was there. You're expecting a monster, but in fact, she actually looks like a little child herself. She comes across very innocent, very naive, someone that you want to protect. Wendy showed absolutely no remorse during the interview. I realized that I did in fact have a Munchausen by proxy case, that she was truly injuring her child to gain attention for herself. And so my goal at that point was to get as much evidence as I could. I was able to get consent from Wendy to search the house. The home that the Scotts lived in was in a very nice area. The house was very organized and clean. Similarly, so was the victim child's bedroom. It was a beautiful bedroom. It looked like she cared very deeply for this child by the way that the room was presented. I spoke to the team leader of our evidence response team that went directly to the kitchen trash can. And sure enough, at the top of the trash can was a large bottle of milk and magnesia. And I saw a red hazmat box, the type you find in a doctor's office where you put expended syringes in. And inside were 5 syringes with blood in them. I actually took the photo books to see if they told any type of story. I was able to see things such as the child had straight hair. And I saw that Wendy had taken pictures of this victim child when she was putting curlers in her hair. I later interviewed the doctors at Walter Reed. They all described her as looking like Shirley Temple, who had curly hair. She wanted her daughter to look adorable and all the doctors to fall in love with her, to be the cutest kid on the floor, if you will. Wendy would do the child's hair in advance the night before, and then she would do something to the child to induce the symptoms that resulted in her bringing the child to the hospital. So it showed premeditation. I did learn through my investigation that Wendy herself had feigned illness at a previous space. She claimed she had leukemia, she was in a wheelchair, she'd shaved her head, she even shaved her eyebrows, literally had everyone absolutely convinced that she had it. She figured out a way to cause those type of symptoms in herself, and she was trying to do the same thing to her daughter.
Sean must now prove he is a fit parent to regain custody of his children.
I had a court date immediately. I had to hire my own attorney.
It was really devastating to him. But he picked himself up and began to make sure the children had a stable, safe place to be.
The evidence, timing, and Sean's record of conduct eventually exonerate him from suspicion.
Sean Scott had been serving his country, only to find that the enemy was not abroad. The enemy was in his own household, nearly killing his child. When the victim and the younger sibling were in Sean Scott's custody, they immediately started improving. The symptoms that the child presented with at Walter Reed Medical Center never, ever recurred.
After convincing a judge that I was a fit parent, I got legal custody of my children.
The case goes from FBI jurisdiction during the investigation to Maryland state prosecutors as they prepare for an indictment.
Agent Smith reviewed with me the information she received from Dr. Delormier, the attending physician at Walter Reed Medical Center. This woman was causing her child a near-death medical condition. The symptoms progressed to dramatic blood loss to the point where on 3 different occasions that the child had to be transfused. Dr. Delormier testified that the child could very well have died with the amount of blood that was taken from her system. It was dangerous enough that as a prosecutor, I had to make sure that she never had contact with that child again, with her younger child, or with any child. That was my focus.
On November 16, 2007, Wendy Scott is indicted on 15 charges.
She was charged with at least 2 counts of first-degree child abuse, second-degree child abuse, first-degree assault, second-degree assault, and reckless endangerment.
On March 13, 2008, Wendy Scott pleads guilty to first-degree child abuse.
In exchange for dismissing the remaining counts, the defense agreed that at sentencing, the parties would be free to argue as to what the appropriate sentence would be.
Wendy's sentencing hearing takes place 2 months later.
When she first came into court, she was just fluttering around, smiling, talking to people. It was clear she wanted to be the center of attention. But she did not testify during the sentencing hearing. The state presented testimony principally from Dr. Delormier. He was so incensed by this whole incident and what that child had suffered. Because of the blood loss levels, the myriad of tests that she had had to undergo, the radiology she was subjected to, his testimony went to the permanency of the injury to that young victim. The defense, they were arguing that she didn't intend to hurt the child. The only reason she was doing it was because of her own mental disorder. She had been diagnosed with a borderline personality disorder. One of the manifestations of that was the fictitious disorder and fictitious disorder by proxy. But she knew that the blood she was withdrawing was causing the child to be transfused at least 3 times. And for her to say that she didn't know that what she was doing was causing harm is just not defensible.
Concerned that Wendy will present a further risk to her daughter if she gets a light sentence, the prosecution presents surprising evidence that her disorder is deeply rooted. Even while on bail, Wendy had been exhibiting classic fictitious disorder behaviors.
She decided to get a job, and while she was there, I discovered that she was faking cancer and diabetes. She would go on her lunch break and sit in her car on a 90+ degree day, and then passing out, and that the ambulance would be called. She submits a request to this employer requesting time off, saying that she had lymphoma and that she needed to go for chemo on a weekly basis.
She was engaging in this very type of behavior, even at a time where she was participating in counseling and under the supervision of a psychiatric professional. She was doing this again.
This revelation seals Wendy's fate with the judge.
The judge sentenced her to 15 years of active incarceration and 5 years of supervised probation.
I had finally come to the realization that she was never going to stop doing this.
Sean takes off his wedding ring, files for divorce, and visits Wendy in jail one last time.
Within a couple of seconds of visiting her, and she looked down and she held my hand and she said, "Why did you take off your ring? Someone will fall in love with you. You can't do that." So I was just like, "I'm sorry." And she's like, "I think you need to go."
After 11 years of trauma, Sean is free to find love with a new partner and discovers there is light at the end of the tunnel.
My brother and Sean worked together at Walter Reed. We were both going through divorces about the same time, and we were friends. I wanted to help Sean primarily because I knew what a wonderful man he was. As a mother, it's an overwhelming story to hear. It still hurts to this day. And I felt terrible for him because it was a lot. And as a mom, like, our kids are close in age, so it really hit home. Our friendship grew more and more. Once his divorce was final, it was like an instant connection. Sean's children needed a lot of healing and love and support due to the damage that was caused by Wendy Scott.
In 2010, Sean and Rachel marry and blend their families. Rachel becomes the loving and protective mother Sean's kids have never known.
While Sean was deployed to Afghanistan, Wendy submitted a request for reconsideration. She wanted to reduce her prison time, and we feel that she coordinated that request in knowing that Sean was in Afghanistan, and so they attended that request. It was probably the most terrifying day of my life because I really didn't want to see Wendy in person, but I was also proud to speak on the kid's behalf because he was obviously not able to be there.
For the first time since her arrest, Wendy takes the stand.
You start by telling him your name.
Wendy Michelle Scott.
You have any children?
Yes, I do.
She obviously presented a very positive picture of her accomplishments.
Do you currently believe you're a danger to the community?
No, I am not.
Not one mention was made about the child. She knew that her counseling would not be successful if she was not able to be honest. So I asked her, tell me what you did to your daughter.
Miss Scott, could you tell us please what you did?
And she was very taken aback by that. The defense, of course, objected to it, and the judge wanted to hear the answer too. She hemmed and she hawed.
Miss Angel, I am not a doctor. I cannot honestly, under oath, say that I know exactly what I did to her. I don't know.
And I don't think she ever really did answer my question. I just said, I have nothing more. I don't have any more questions.
And then I read a victim impact statement. She works hard every single day of her life to try to be a typical kid. She will be scarred forever. It is something that we will deal with for the rest of her life. And part of that was I had said that his daughter had her feeding tube removed, and as I was saying that, there was a cheer from Wendy, like, yay! Thank goodness I had the DA and the FBI agent on both sides of me because I think I would have done something mean. She did this to her daughter, and I'm the one that, along with Sean, we got rid of it and reached that milestone together. The damage and the harm that she did to an innocent little girl is just baffling. I think it's evil.
Ms. Scott, that sentence I imposed then is appropriate, and it remains appropriate. You nearly killed her, and your motion to modify is denied.
Wendy loses the appeal for a shortened sentence and serves her full term.
Sean and the kids are in a much better place. We all had to do the hard work together as a family. One of my proudest moments was to be by his side when he was promoted to lieutenant colonel because his career was almost destroyed because of Wendy. All 4 kids were at the ceremony, and of course, I cried. But it was just a very special day.
Sean is a proud and intensely private man, but he tells his story to warn others.
I'm at peace with it now. I'm okay. I cherish and appreciate the love and support that my wife and my children and my extended family and all my friends have given me to be able to get to the point. My purpose and mission will be to help somebody out there who's doubting themselves. Take action, don't hesitate, seek help. If you got doubts or questions, talk to somebody.
Sean is joyful in his new life and has high hopes for the future of his children.
They're strong, resilient children. I'm very proud of them. They're going to go on to do great things in their own right out there.
They say the river remembers. It keeps the cool of November, the whisper of sirens, the secret weight of things tossed in when the town sleeps. On a wind-bitten night in 1991, the Maumee ran black as a headline, and somewhere along its sloping banks a girl's scream split the frost, traveled through cattails and chain-link fences, and dissolved into the hum of a distant highway. The next morning, the town woke to the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. By noon, there was police tape snagged on thorn bushes like yellow wounds, cameras fogging in the cold, neighbors trading rumors across porches, missing, vanished, no trace. By sundown, the words hardened into habit, cold case, Matt Tick be un, shock to the community, and the river kept moving as if it hadn't heard a thing. Her name was Elise, 19, community college freshman, night shift waitress at a chrome and neon diner off State Route 25. A face built for missing posters, dark eyes, a half smile that looked caught between patience and dare. She left work at 1:12 a.m. Clock stamp lopsided like a shrug, told a busboy she'd be fine to walk the 4 blocks to her apartment, pulled her scarf up over her nose, and vanished into the grainy gray of a street lamp. Security cameras back then were the kind that blinked sleepily, capturing smudges and ghosts. The last smudge of Elise drifted across a cheap, pixel-broken frame, then was eaten by static. Detectives arrived with the usual tools, clipboards and coffee and cardboard, gloved hands that zipped through alley dumpsters and yanked at locked doors, flashlights that wrote pale circles on frost. They had a map stabbed with pushpins, the diner, the corner she cut, the footpath under the old viaduct, the river's slow bend. At the viaduct, a single earring winked up from the mud, not quite convinced it wanted to be found. The clasp was snapped. Man Moi Ki La, the local Vietnamese paper, called it later, a strange clue, an earring in the wrong place, too neat, too loud. It was the only thing that felt like a breadcrumb. The town tried to fix itself with casseroles and prayer. Volunteers beat the weeds flat along the towpath, calling Elise's name until the syllables felt like a borrowed word. The diner propped her photo by the register, a candid, her forehead patched with flour from a pie dough fight, her mouth open mid-laugh, and the tip jar bulged with small bills for a reward that never landed right. In November 1991, hope was a ritual. Porch lights left on until dawn, radio spots with her description, a pastor who said her name twice as if repeating it would anchor her back to a pew. Weeks passed, the air sharpened. Rumors sprouted and spread in the cold like cracks in a windshield. A trucker, a jealous ex, a shadow in the booth at 12:58 a.m. Everyone had a theory. No one had Elise. By December, the investigation was all paper cuts and dead ends. A lead from a payphone turned out to be a drunk dare. A footprint in the silt near the river wore out its welcome under a lab light and said nothing. One detective, the type who kept his top coat buttoned to the throat even indoors, built a private ritual. Every time he crossed the viaduct, he dropped a penny off the side and listened for the clink. The pennies disappeared. So did he, eventually, into another precinct, another stack of cold files, the kind that lower a room's temperature just by being opened. Years stitched themselves into a long, gray scarf. The earring slept in evidence, quiet as a moth. Elise's mother moved 2 towns over, into a smaller apartment where the electrical hum from the fridge masked the night noises. The diner became a pizza place, then a vape shop, then nothing, just a hollow brick tooth in a smile that had forgotten how to be friendly. The river thickened with algae some summers, choked on its own remembrance, then cleared again as if it had made up its mind to forget. Then the year changed its shape. 2023, 32 calendar flips later, a detective named Hartley took the cold case key out of a desk nobody liked to open. Fresh eyes, new software, a room lined with corkboards and twine like a conspiracy theorist's confessional. He pored over the old VHS with a modern microscope, digitized frames that once looked like snow to see the storm inside them. He read interviews that had grown brittle with time, listening for the splinter of a lie. He sent the earrings back for DNA extraction, a technology that didn't exist when Elise vanished. The lab called him Sir and "We'll try." He said, "Try harder." The town didn't know it was being rewound, but odd things began to happen in the margins. Old witnesses picked up unknown caller IDs and heard the past in a stranger's voice. A man who had claimed he was out of state the night Elise disappeared now remembered a broken heater and a long walk to a liquor store. A waitress retired to Florida, sun-spotted and stubborn, mailed a napkin folded into a square. On it, a name scribbled in grease pencil, J.M. She wrote, "He tipped in quarters. He watched her leave. He had a scar like a comma." Another man called to say his brother, dead from a winter that wouldn't forgive, used to tell a barstool story about a bad night near the viaduct, a scream that didn't sound like a deer. When asked why he never said so earlier, the man exhaled. "We all told ourselves it was a deer," he said. "You say that enough times, the word becomes a blanket." Then the lab rang a bell only Hartley heard. Partial profile, male. Not enough for a name, enough for a direction. He shipped the data to genealogists, who live inside family trees like careful birds, hopping from branch to branch, weighing leaf against leaf. Surnames like Riverstones were turned and turned. A distant cousin posted a photo in 2011 of a backyard barbecue. In the back left corner, a man turned away just enough to be mysterious, a scar peeking from his jaw like punctuation. The caption read, "Uncle J, cold case, DNA twist, community on edge." Hartley checked the address on the photo tag, a cul-de-sac, a house that had been blue, then beige, now a cautious gray. He sat outside in an unmarked car and watched a dog that barked at its own reflection in a storm door. He watched a man in his 50s mow a lawn too short, striping the grass into a tight green barcode. He watched him carry the recycling to the curb and wince when the bottle clinked, as if sound itself were accusatory. He watched him toss a cigarette butt into a coffee can of sand, watched the tiny ember give up without ceremony. The scar was there, a comma at the hinge of the jaw, a perpetual pause. He waited until the trash night and took the can. The law allows it. Garbage belongs to the curb, not the owner. Inside, a soda can with a lip print, a fast food straw, a hair waiting for a vacuum that never came. The lab feasted. Numbers lined up like soldiers, clicked into columns, saluted the partial profile from the decades-old earring. The screen glowed with the word that makes detectives feel the world tilt back onto its axle. Match. Arrest warrants have a sound, a stapler's last bite, a breath held between signatures. Dawn raids have a smell, wet grass, coffee cooling on a dash, the metallic taste of adrenaline under the tongue. Hartley knocked. The door opened to an ordinary morning face. One beat, two. "Jason Meyer," he said, name crisp as the edge of a badge. "We need to talk about November 16th, 1991. The town heard the news like a thunderclap, a headline that writes itself. Ohio 1991 cold case solved. Arrest shocks community. Some people cried relief and others cried at the cruelty of relief arriving so late it had grown unfamiliar. The diner's last remaining waitress, now grandmotherly and fierce, called 3 old co-workers and said, "You can sleep with the porch lights off tonight." The pastor stood in Sunday's pale light and said, "Justice comes on a clock we don't set." And someone in the third pew looked up and thought, finally. Elise's mother, older, thinner, her voice a thistle in the wind, spoke to the news camera and said, "I have waited 32 years to hear a door close." But solved is a word with sharp edges. The arrest was a period at the end of a long sentence, but periods can hide questions like double agents. Where was Elise? Where had the river kept its secret? Why had the sound of a scream been catalogued as a deer and shelved? Why had the earring chosen to be found and the rest refused? The state pressed charges. The evidence marched past the jury like a grim parade. DNA on the earring back, a timeline that slotted like teeth, a co-worker's recollection sharpened by remorse. Yet memory is a treacherous stagehand, moving props around when no one is looking. The defense called it contamination. The prosecution called it science that finally learned how to listen. In the town's bars, in the flicker blue of living rooms, the debate was a new kind of noise. Some said, "We always suspected him," and then realized they had not. Others said, "We never would have guessed," and then admitted a chill had run through them once when he stopped speaking mid-sentence to watch the news about Elise on a TV with the volume down. In the quiet between broadcasts, people put themselves back in 1991 and rearranged their movements on that night, wondering if a different route, A slower walk, a louder call might have changed the weather of a decade. Meanwhile, the river performed its ancient trick. It kept flowing. Fishermen cast lines like questions and pulled up answers the length of a forearm, silver and slippery and unconcerned. Kids tossed stones and competed for the biggest splash. The viaduct shed paint and gathered graffiti like stubborn ivy. The place where the earring winked remained the kind of spot you don't notice unless you already know. Then you can't stop seeing it. On the courthouse steps, when the cameras panned to catch the ride to county lockup, Jason turned his head and the scar flashed its comma, its promise of another clause. "I didn't," he said, voice level, eyes numb as river stones. It sounded like the truth does when it's being impersonated by a stubborn lie. Or the other way around. The town did what towns do when they've been taught to doubt their instincts. They held both beliefs at once and let them circle like hawks over an empty field. Solving isn't the same as finding. Justice doesn't always dig where the body is. The arrest put a name to the night. It didn't put bones in the ground. The detectives kept walking the river's edge as if the water might, out of boredom or mercy, spit out what it had swallowed. Hartley stood where the towpath dips and took the penny from his pocket, dropped it through the cold air, waited for the clink. He heard it. He always would. He would also always hear a scream someone called a deer, always feel the ache of a comma where a period should be. And in that ache lived the real story, the one we tell ourselves in the bone-deep hours. A girl stepping into a November that never ended, a town learning that even a solved case can leave a room colder than before, a river that keeps what it's given and offers back now and then. Only the smallest glitter of an earring to remind us how little it takes for a mystery to begin. Morning leaks into the courthouse like a confession written in pale ink, and the hallway smells of coffee, floor wax, and the restless patience of people who've practiced waiting. On the notice board, the old headline is pinned next to the new one, Cold Case, Solved, and between them is the stretch of 3 decades where silence learned to talk. Hartley stands with a file hugged to his chest as if warmth can be transferred through paper. The file is heavier today. It contains the earring photos, the lab printouts, the genealogist's family tree lattices like winter branches against a bleached sky. It also contains something that isn't documented anywhere, the hum under his ribs that started the day the lab called match and hasn't stopped since. Across the street, a shoe repair shop opens its metal grate with a rattle, and the owner looks up as the prisoner transport pulls to the curb. Jason steps down in shackles that don't clang because the deputies keep a hand on the chain. He looks smaller than the yard where he mowed those short barcode stripes. He looks like a misprint of himself. The scar holds its comma shape, a pause where a life changed direction or stopped entirely. A reporter asks a question that is not a question. Did you do it? Jason's eyes skim past everything and land on the farthest edge of the sky, where weather forms. His mouth moves. No sound. The arraignment is a narrow room crowded with the public's curiosity, a prosecutor who wears his tie like an exclamation point, a defense attorney who treats silence like a weapon. The judge's gavel doesn't crack so much as it lands with authority, an anchor dropped into restless water. Charges are read, the calendar is set, the phrase probable cause blooms and fades like a bruise. Elise's mother sits in the second row with both hands around a rosary that looks worn enough to remember 1991, every bead a day, every bead a headline, every bead the shadow of a face she held, then lost, then learned to speak to, like a saint who doesn't answer but listens hard. Back in the squad room, the cold caseboard glows the stale color of institutional lights. Pins and twine pull taut across 4 decades of Ohio air. Hartley traces a single string with his fingertip, feels the grit of tape corners as if the past had a texture. He rewinds the night again, but this time he doesn't just replay it. He moves through it. Elise clocks out. The neon diner sign sizzles like a snake that knows it's being watched. The fry cook counts the register. A busboy hums a song nobody will remember. The camera blinks and misses the crucial frame, then offers up the smudge that became a shrine. Elise pulls her scarf up, breath like steam from a vent. She cuts the corner. The viaduct coughs out wind. The river overhears what nobody else wants to hear. Somewhere nearby, an engine idles too long. Zoom out. The town has a grid, a blueprint for how despair travels. A payphone outside a shuttered video store, a grocery lot with sodium lights that turn skin the color of cold eggs, a cul-de-sac that curls into itself like a pill bug. If you overlay the 1991 map with the 2023 one, certain arteries match, and certain paths go nowhere because the past put up a fence. They revisit the waitress's napkin, grease pencil letters fat and urgent. J.M. He tipped in quarters. He watched her leave. He had a comma scar. The napkin lives in an evidence pouch now, but it still smells faintly of onions and fear. The waitress in Florida apologizes without being asked. We were told not to write things down back then, she says on speakerphone, ocean hiss in the background like interference. I wrote anyway, then I kept it because I didn't trust the drawer I put it in. Hartley asks why she wrote JM and not the full name. Because when I asked for his last name for the pie contest raffle, she says, he smiled like an apology and said, just JM. And it felt like a rule. Another interview, the retired night shift cop who pulled a double the week Elise disappeared. He remembers the weather better than he remembers his anniversary. He says the cold had that glitter to it, the kind that makes bad choices look bold and good choices look optional. He remembers a blue pickup that circled the block twice. He remembers a breathless teenager who reported screaming by the river but then laughed it off when his friends arrived. And the report was written in the ink color of doubt. The teenager is a father now. When Hartley knocks, he answers with a look like someone who recognizes the sound of a dead arriving. I said dear, the man admits, and the syllable tastes wrong to him even after all these years. I said dear because if it was a woman, then I had to be somebody else that night. The earring, under glass, is the kind of small that demands reverence, a cheap metal setting, a missing stone, a back clasp with someone's skin cells like ash in a thurible. The lab tech, bright-eyed from sleeplessness, explains for the 5th time how they pulled the partial in 2019 and saved it, and how new enzymes and stubborn temper got them the rest in 2023, and how sometimes the body leaves a message, and sometimes that message waits for the era that knows the language. Hartley lets the explanation wash over him while his mind fixes on the shape of a young woman's ear, the casual decision she made that morning to wear that particular pair, the way chance can be mistaken for destiny when we tell the story later. Genealogy is a quiet chase through crowded rooms, a cousin's saliva, a family tree that forks around a secret. A marriage that didn't happen but should have, a child born in a different county for reasons nobody writes down, the shadow of a great uncle who preferred the night and had a temper that came on like weather. The names roll like credits, and then one pauses. Meyer, a line breaks, a branch bends. The scar in the 2011 photo threads the present to the past with a single, shaky stitch. Defense strategy arrives like a cold wind under a door. Chain of custody, contamination risk, garbage pull legality. You found a soda can on the curb and built a man out of it, the attorney says in a preliminary hearing, voice tuned to skeptical velvet. The prosecutor answers with the statute, with case law, with the ordinary miracle of trash relinquishment. The judge listens the way mountains listen to wind, patient, stony, old. Outside, a woman who never met Elise leaves flowers on the courthouse steps like an offering to a god who hasn't introduced himself. Hartley pivots from courtroom to field. He walks the viaduct at 1:00 a.m. with his collar up and his breath ghosting. The graffiti is newer, but the acoustic is the same. Sound does tricks here. You can hear a whisper as if it's beside you and miss a shout 10 feet away. He drops a penny. Clink. He walks the towpath and feels the way the river drafts cold from your bones. He stops where the earring was found and kneels, not to pray, not exactly, but to negotiate with a place. What else did you take, he asks the ground, which keeps secrets as a job and not a hobby. A fisherman, night owl, heavy jacket, face mapped with years, watches the detective in the beam of his headlamp. You looking for what she left? The fisherman asks. Hartley says he is. The fisherman nods to the water. River keeps a ledger, he says. Sometimes it pays out late, sometimes it pays in the wrong currency. He casts and reels nothing and doesn't mind. He tells Hartley about 1991, how the cold made the line sing, how he heard something like a plea and called it a fox, then went home and poured 2 fingers of regret and slept badly for a week. I said fox because foxes don't demand anything of you, he says. I said fox because if it was a person, I'd have to be a person back. Jason's former neighbors fill in spaces nobody asked them to fill. They remember his lawn like they're testifying about it. They remember the dog who barked at reflections. The only thing that spooked him, one says, amusement brittle at the edges. They remember a garage where the light was on at odd hours, the aha of a circular saw, the whine of sanding, the smell of chemicals that could have been paint thinner, could have been something else. They remember he disappeared for long night drives that had no destinations, returned with gas receipts from towns that fit a radius around the river like a noose. And then a new thread coughs up dust. An old motel ledger, rescued from mold by a clerk who never throws away paper because paper is how you prove you were there. November 16th, 1991. Room 12 paid cash. Initials in the note margin. J. There's no M. We didn't write full names if we didn't have to, the clerk, now a grandfather with hands like wrenches, tells Hartley. People liked privacy. Privacy is a word that can mean don't ask or don't look. Hartley asks for the room key, the old kind, metal, toothy, heavy, and the man smiles like someone who has waited to be asked. He digs in a cigar box and lays the key on the counter as if it is currency still valid. Room 12 has been repainted a half dozen times since 1991. The carpet is newer. The bed is not the same bed, but places remember in their joints. Behind the vanity, where a careless renovation left a slim cavity, Hartley finds a strip of floral fabric cut with a clumsy hand. The pattern matches the blouse in Elise's missing poster. Not proof. Not yet. A shadow of proof. He seals it, logs it, ships it. The lab promises nothing and then calls him at 3:11 a.m. because that's when news like this likes to arrive. Trace fibers consistent. A hair that might be Elise's or might be a cousin's cousin. A timeline that tightens like a tourniquet. Jason's alibi changes its socks again. He was at a friend's house. The friend moved. The friend died. The friend's sister remembers a fight that night about a borrowed tool and a debt that made the air taste like battery acid. She remembers Jason saying, "I need to take a drive to clear my head." She remembers the drive took 3 hours longer than clearing a head should. She remembers the comma scar and how people always asked and he always said garage accident, and she believed him until the day belief started costing her sleep. The prosecutor wants motive because juries like a story with a clean hinge. Hartley isn't hungry for motive. He has seen crimes that bloom out of boredom like mold, out of anger like a spark in dry grass, out of opportunity like a door you didn't mean to find open. Still, he looks. Jason was at the diner that week. He ordered coffee he didn't drink and left quarters that equaled exact change plus one. He watched the neon reflection in the window as if it were a movie in which he could choose the next scene. He parked twice across the street and once by the river because some nights you practice the thing you tell yourself you'll never do. Elise's mother sits at her kitchen table, the rosary now a habit rather than a shield. She pulls out a shoebox and empties it onto the table. Ticket stubs, a folded program from a play in which Elise wore a cardboard crown, a library card, 2 Polaroids where the flash burned out the corners like sunlight, a receipt for a blouse with a floral pattern that looks like the motel wall fragment's ghost. "I kept everything," she says, and she doesn't cry because some wells run dry and then fill with something harder than water. "I thought if I kept the paper, it would keep the person." At dusk, the river lifts a skin of reflected orange and hands it to the sky. Hartley walks the bank and thinks about commas, about how they turn sentences, about how a life can be diverted by a mark shaped like a half moon. He thinks about the bartender who heard Jason say once, "It's not what you think," to nobody at all. He thinks about the fisherman and the fox and the deer and the way we rename sounds until they no longer insist on rescue. He thinks about the motel room key on his desk, heavy as an intention. Back at the board, strings crisscross, and for the first time the design looks less like a net and more like a map that could, if followed, lead to what remains. The earring, the napkin, the garbage can soda, the motel ledger, the night drive, the blue pickup the retired cop can't forget, the dog that barked at ghosts, the river, patient as a ledger clerk, keeping columns straight, carrying numbers forward, waiting for the day the sum insists on being tallied. Hartley writes one word on a yellow tab and sticks it dead center. Where? Because solved isn't found, because a name on a charging document is not the sound of dirt giving up a secret, because the town still walks with a porchlight hunch in its shoulders, because a mother still holds a library card like a passport to a country she can no longer visit, because the river remembers in ripples, not sentences, because the comma on a man's jaw is both pause and warning, because there is a place between headline and closure where the voice lowers, the pace tightens, the audience leans in, and the night, at last, might decide to speak. Night tightens like a tourniquet, and the town breathes through its teeth. The courthouse sleeps, the diner ghost lot holds its sodium yellow, and the river keeps its nocturne, a low-throated hum like an engine that never learned how to stall. Hartley sits at his desk in the small hours blue and lets the silence say its piece. The motel key is a cold weight under his palm. The earring photo is a miniature moon. He flips open a pad and writes nothing for a long time, then writes a single sentence that feels like a dare. If the room was a way station, the river was the route. The cadaver dog unit arrives at dawn with tails like metronomes and noses tuned to the grammar of decay. The handlers talk in murmurs that keep the dog's attention pinned to the ground as if the earth were whispering secrets only some species are allowed to hear. The riverbank exhale is mud and penny metal and old leaves, Flags go in where the dogs sit, polite and grave, as if they've discovered a shrine. The sonar crew follows, unspooling a screen's worth of grainy topography, hills and valleys of silt that look like the moon's bad side. The operator taps a screen corner and speaks a word that is halfway between scientific and superstitious: anomaly. They bring in divers, not heroes so much as monks in neoprene. Bodies accustomed to the cold soundlessness under the surface. The towpath gathers spectators the way a wound gathers fingers. People point, bite lips, fold arms, unfold them, tell themselves they aren't watching for a body, only for closure, then flinch at the treachery of the word. Hartley stands a little apart and watches how the river greets intrusion with a professional calm. The water closes over each dark helmet and then turns back to its business. A bookkeeper who does not pause when someone drops in to check the ledger. Elise's mother does not come. She sits at home with the television off and the radio on low, tuned to a station that plays old standards in which love always returns by the last chorus. The phone on the table is a live wire. She looks at the shoebox again and thinks about what she wants from the day. Not a bone, not a ring. No, that would be an answer too specific to live with. She wants proof that the world operates on rules, even if they are cruel ones, that what was taken goes somewhere and not nowhere, that the word found can, once in a great while, belong to the living as well as the dead. The diver surfaces and shakes his head, a motion that means many things. No, not here. No, not yet. No, not like this. Another diver emerges, holding an object like a coin grown up. It is a hubcap, a little history spun loose, bright with silt that looks like frost. The river withholds what it withholds. The dogs work the far bank. A flag splashes into place. Another anomaly declares itself, then disguises itself, then returns. The divers dip again. In the courthouse basement, evidence sits in climate-controlled stillness. Crimes Museum. A tech with careful hands opens a box from the motel. The strip of floral fabric is all patience and denial. Under a magnifier, the weave looks like topography. Valleys where skin might have brushed, peaks where time refused to surrender. A second strip is teased from behind the vanity, adhesive turned to amber that behaves like memory. The lab compares it to the blouse receipt and nods as if a conversation has started, quiet, promising nothing but continuation. Hartley drives the route between the diner and the viaduct and talks himself through the night the way a pilot talks through instruments. He notes the bulbs that were out in 1991 according to the maintenance logs, the angles where a watcher could become a shadow and a shadow could become a man. He measures the distance a girl could cover in 47 seconds. He stops under the viaduct and listens to the way tires on steel imitate distant rain. He rehearses a possibility until it feels like it might have been real. A blue pickup easing curbside, a passenger window breathing warm air, a voice that sounds like a suggestion, a hand that closes around a sleeve with the casual certainty of someone who believes the world owes him compliance. Jason's garage becomes an excavation site, layers peeled back as if time were drywall. Search warrants flower like subpoenas in spring. The shelving is bare except for jars of screws sorted with military neatness. The pegboard is an argument for order. The concrete bears stains that narrate nothing with specificity. Oil, varnish, a life spent making and unmaking. The saw is gone, but its circle remains in a dust outline, a thin halo that remembers what's been removed. In a back corner where two walls meet like conspirators, a crack runs a diagonal. A forensic crew sprays luminol, and the blue that blooms is ambiguous, the kind of color that makes hope and dread indistinguishable. Old blood sings under chemical moonlight. Everything else sings, too. The report will say inconclusive. Hartley's bones register a note very near to music. The defense files motions like thrown stones. Suppress the garbage pull, question the chain, dismantle the genealogy. They pronounce algorithm as if it were a magician's cheap deck. The prosecutor counters with case law and a tone that implies the future is not interested in returning to the past's blind spots. The judge, face carved from patience, schedules, reschedules, bristles, relents. The calendar becomes a weapon both sides wield until time itself begins to look complicit. A rumor climbs the scaffolding of the town. A storage unit in a facility by the rail yard, paid for in cash since 2006, size 10 by 15, door number 38. Registered to a name that does not appear on Jason's official papers but does appear on a fishing license that expired in 1999. The manager, who runs his operation like a small navy, produces logs that smell faintly of oil and ink. Hartley signs, slides the bolt, lifts the door. The light batters dust motes into brief stars. Inside, boxes labeled in a hand that wants to be admired. Tools wrapped in towels like gifts. A cooler, the ordinary kind, with faded stickers about a tournament somebody didn't win. They open the cooler as if opening a future. Inside are not bones, not trophies, but a nest of plastic sleeves, each holding papers that don't want to be read. Gas receipts, motel stubs, a folded napkin from the diner dated a week before Elise vanished, a looped E in a server's handwriting that feels like being touched. There is also a Polaroid of the river in winter, taken from the viaduct, composition too deliberate to be accidental. The corner bears a thumbprint, the whirl frozen like a galaxy. The lab will lift it, turn it, carve a number from it. The number will nudge the match quality from compelling toward mathematical. The defense will call it coincidence. The jury, later, will call it a sign routed through chance to find its mark. Back to sonar. Mid-afternoon, a shape resolves on the screen that isn't boulder or branch, not quite symmetrical enough to be debris, not ragged enough to be history's litter. The operator adjusts gain. The shape sharpens into geometry, two parallel lines like rails, and, between them, a suggestion of a surface that doesn't belong. The diver drops. The river smells like pennies and breath. The silt refuses, then loosens. Hands feel a curve where curves do not grow naturally. A rope goes down. A harness goes around. The winch whines. The shape rises slow as a thought nobody wants to finish. Metal breeches, black with time. A trunk lid that once gleamed cheap factory paint, now armored in river. The crowd inhales with one mouth. The trunk lip severs the day from the night and pulls a shadow up into the light's jurisdiction. The divers step back with a coordination that is part training, part reverence. The lid resists, succumbs, lifts like an eyelid. Inside, not what anyone rehearsed. Not a body. A heavy bundle of clothes tied with twine that has turned the color of old teeth. A purse collapsed into itself like a quiet animal. A shoe whose mate lives on the missing poster. A cassette tape in a cracked plastic shell. Scottish detective novels say luck is a drunk you must meet halfway. Hartley kneels. He does not touch. Not yet. The evidence tech does the slow ceremony. Photographs for the unseen tribunal of later. Gloved hands coaxing the past to travel in the right containers. The cassette goes into a bag like a reliquary. The purse, emptied, proves to be two things at once. An ordinary woman's inventory, chapstick, a folded note from a classmate with an arrow through a heart doodle, and a catalog of loss. The shoe is the right size, the right scuff, the right worn heel pattern. The crowd tries not to cheer, tries not to imagine what it means to cheer when a shoe of a missing girl comes back as if returning from a long errand. They label, seal, lift, carry. The trunk's vehicle identity number is devoured by rust and river, but the edges whisper digits that the lab will coax into legibility the way astronomers coax galaxies out of background hiss. A tow truck muscles the trunk onto a flatbed. The chain's clank sounds like an amen. In the evidence lab, someone finds a portable player old enough to know what a cassette wants. The tech cleans heads with alcohol and a patience inherited from a mentor who retired with a drawer full of solved. The tape is labeled in blue ballpoint. Mix, fall. Whoever wrote it pressed hard. The impression has bled to the other side like a message hammering to be heard. They press play. Static. Warble. A song that was on the radio a lot in 1991. All jangly guitars and lyrics that feel prophetic in retrospect because we always drag prophecy into the past to make it look prescient. The second song is a ballad Elise's best friend says she hated. She called it funeral music, the friend says on the phone, her laugh small and sharp as broken candy. But she kept it on the tape for her roommate, they shared. Then comes the sound no one expected, voices between tracks recorded over by accident or design. A man's voice saying, "Don't," half amused, half command. A woman's voice, Elise or not, saying, "I'm cold." A car's interior noises, the click of a lighter, the radio being turned down. The man's voice again, "You said you'd come." The word come is shaped like a promise turned to rope. Hartley listens with his ear close, as if proximity could geminate detail. The lab provides filters, strips static, turns white noise down until human noise emerges like print in developer. The conversation is full of commas, pauses where the man waits for the world to default to his want. The woman laughs once, unwilling and shallow. Then there is a series of small sounds, like cloth being adjusted, like resistance being packaged for transport. The defense will say the tape could belong to anyone. The prosecution will say the tape belonged to the trunk. The jury will sit under the weight of a purse and a shoe and the unkind physics of circumstance and decide whether doubt is reasonable or a habit. But that is later. Now, in the hum of the lab, Hartley closes his eyes and sees the blue pickup as surely as if it idled outside the window, exhaust winding away like a rumor. Jason sits in county in a cinderblock room that has held more secrets than pews hold prayers. He stares at a spot where paint blisters like old gum. His attorney leans forward and asks if there is anything at all, that will blindside them. Jason's mouth is a straight line. I didn't, he says, and for a flicker he almost believes the sentence hard enough that the room might realign to accommodate it. The attorney reads him the inventory from the trunk, and the river, and the storage unit. Jason blinks twice, as if someone has turned the lights up. Reporters rehearse the headline, River Find Deepens Solved Case. The pastor edits his Sunday remarks and removes the part where he promised the word closure would taste sweet. The fisherman who heard a fox writes on a scrap of paper, I am sorry, and folds it into his pocket where it will soften at the corners from handling. The shoe repairman sharpens a blade and thinks about the day his craft will no longer be needed because people will stop fixing things and only replace them, and he hopes the town will choose the older habit when it comes to its dead. Hartley stands at the viaduct railing and feels the metal cool his palms. He drops a penny and doesn't listen for the clink this time. He watches the circling ripple erase its own fingerprint. He thinks about how the case has shifted from who to where, and now, uncomfortably, to how do we live with what we know? He thinks about commas again, how they delay, how they suggest more is coming. He realizes this. Perhaps the scar was telling the truth of him. Always a pause, never an end. A man incapable of giving the period that grief demands. Night lowers, the towpath empties, the divers stow their second skins. The anomaly is gone because it's been hauled into the open and named, which is to say disarmed, which is to say only partially true. The trunk has been replaced by a rectangle of water that looks no different from any other rectangle of water, and yet everyone who watched will always see absence occupy that space like furniture. In the lab, someone labels the cassette Exhibit Q and slides it into a drawer. In a house with the porch light still, reflexively, left on, a mother presses her forehead to the cool window and lets the glass hold a portion of her heat. In county, a man learns the slow arithmetic of days. In a garage ransacked to its sensible bones, a dust halo marks the outline of a saw that will never be found. And somewhere in the town's shared nervous system, call it memory, call it misery, call it the thing we tap when we say we, a fuse burns toward a charge laid down years ago. An address that didn't matter then, a witness overlooked because he was inconvenient, a line in a ledger that glowed only when placed next to a cassette labeled by a girl who wanted to make autumn sound like a party where summer wasn't invited. The charge is going to blow, it will not destroy, it will reveal. The river is not finished, the room is not emptied, the comma is not spent, the voiceover tightens, the camera leans in, the headline holds its breath and waits for the next word to elect itself. Morning walks in wearing yesterday's mud and nobody tells it to change. The evidence lab hums like a hive on the verge of meaning. The trunk, river black, hinge stiff, prehistoric, sits on sawhorses beneath lights that show no mercy. A tech with steady hands wipes an inside seam with a swab as if taking the trunk's pulse. Another crouches with a loop where rust has eaten the story but not the syntax. The VIN is a broken prayer, digits drowned, digits scarred, yet there's a cadence to what remains, a rhythm that suggests what once was whole. They lift it the way archaeologists lift a tablet and feed it to software that's learned to translate damage into digits. The screen blinks, hesitates, concedes a sequence with the sheepishness of a witness who waited too long to speak. Database time is different from human time. It doesn't yawn, it doesn't check the clock, it fetches. Two returns shoulder their way to the front, a 1987 mid-size sedan reported scrapped in 1992 and a duplicate VIN stamped on an aftermarket replacement trunk lid ordered by a body shop 3 towns over in late October of the same year. The body shop is gone now, a bakery in its bones, ovens where lifts used to be. Hartley drives there anyway, parks beside a delivery van painted the color of surrender and steps into a room that smells like sugar and ghost grease. The baker is the former owner's daughter, a woman who remembers receipts better than birthdays because paper never asks you to be more than accurate. She has a ledger, the old kind with green columns and a silver ribbon that knows the route to the right page by heart. She licks a finger, turns, points. Trunk lid for a sedan. Customer paid cash. Name field, empty. Note in the margin, picked up by J. The J has a hooky tail that looks familiar. Hartley holds the page the way you hold a note from a past self when it turns out to still be right. Did your father ever say what shop the lid came from? She nods at a stack of flattened memories, invoice carbons kept out of habit and thrift. One bears a stamp from a salvage yard near the rail yard. The circle tightens, the map writes itself. The salvage yard fence leans like an old man with good stories. Inside, rows of metal carcasses dream in oxidized oranges and browns, weeds rising through where petals once argued with feet. The yard boss wears a cap with a logo from a company that hasn't existed since dial-up. He knows where everything is because he never threw anything away, not even the old transaction slips that smell like damp tobacco. "You want October 91? He says, and the precision of his memory makes the air tighten. "We had a sedan come in, front end trashed, trunk intact. Some guy bought the lid cash. He had a pickup that didn't match the part and said it was for a friend, which is a phrase you learn to nod at and not believe." Hartley asks if he remembers scars. The yard boss snorts. "I remember everybody," he says, "but I remember the ones who didn't want to be remembered the most. This guy, jaw nicked like he ran into a comma." Back at county, Jason sits across from his attorney and looks like someone has swapped his bones for lesser material. The attorney lays down photographs like cards in a game rigged by chronology. The salvage yard, the ledger entry, the trunk relieved from River, prepared for its second career as a witness. "You're a man with a comma on his face buying punctuation for a car you never admitted to driving," the attorney says, voice too tired to perform outrage. "That lid shows up in the river with her things." Jason's mouth tightens the way a fist tightens when it tells you it's not a fist. "Coincidence," he says, and even the cinder blocks seem to flinch at the poverty of the word. The cassette undergoes a second life. The lab runs the voices through filters and finds frequencies like fingerprints. A speech analyst, calm the way people are calm when they spend their days teasing order from static, listens for formants, for sibilants, for the curve where vowels curve in individual throats. She asks for samples of Jason speaking in 1991, a request that sounds impossible until you remember small-town life records itself obsessively, church picnic footage, high school game tapes, a bar's novelty karaoke cam some guy set up for laughs and forgot to turn off. In one tape, a younger Jason yells into a microphone the way young men do when borrowed power tastes better than beer. The analyst fillets the sound. The graphs cough up similarities like a confession in math, not a slam dunk. Enough for a courtroom temperature drop when displayed in color. Hartley returns to the motel, room 12 turned bland by a decade's attempts to be unmemorable. He kneels at the vanity's wounded back like a penitent electrician and finds another shard of floral fabric lodged where a sloppy cut became a storage shelf for regret. He pockets air around the find and imagines it, a woman pressed against this cheap veneer, one hand on the sink basin, the other caught in cloth, the sudden sound of tearing, nobody hearing because the TV in room 11 was too loud and the highway is a forgiving choir. He stands, breathes, leaves. This is a job of walking away with something you can't carry. The blue pickup, once a rumor's color, tries to behave like a memory and fails until a retired patrolman points his fork at the air over meatloaf and says, "I pulled a ticket in 91 for a pickup parked wrong at the viaduct. That was a slow night. I remember because I wrote a haiku on the back while I waited for the driver." He laughs and then stops when he sees Hartley isn't laughing. Old records yield a citation slip with a license plate that cross-references to an address. Jason Myers' then-girlfriend, later in absence with a forwarding address nobody kept. She is in Arizona now, sunstruck and careful. Phone call, hesitation, flight could be heard as guilt. Sometimes it's only survival. "He borrowed my truck all the time," she says. "He said night air sorted his head. He came back one night with mud like he'd been arguing with the riverbank. He didn't like me asking. He liked me least when I asked." Tool marks on the trunk lid speak with a diction only metallurgists understand. The cut edge tells you about the blade, about the speed, about whether impatience or ritual powered the hand. The lab finds striations that whisper a model number common but not ubiquitous. Purchases of that blade type merge in a report with a grocery list of hardware stores long gone, and one still clinging to life amid aisles that smell like rain and possibility. Hartley walks those aisles breathing the guilty comfort of rows and rows of things that promise to fix anything broken if you have the instructions and enough light. The owner, third generation, shelves ordered the way grief would love to be ordered, pulls purchase books kept on paper because computers forget what humans know in their bones. A line, November 2nd, 1991, 2 metal-cutting discs, cash, initials JM if the store clerk was feeling diligent and brave. "We wrote initials when people looked like they'd argue with the pen," the owner says. He didn't argue. He smiled like someone filing you for later. Elise's best friend, from the tape, the one who called the ballad funeral music, arrives at the station with shoulders squared like a decision. She brings a box with her that she only briefly lets go of. Inside, a cheap camera with a used-up roll-the-lab coaxed image from one frame at a time. Parties in living rooms that wanted to be apartments and were still practicing. A cat with ambitions. Elise cutting a pie with the grace of someone who had planned to move through life without apology. In one photo, there's a truck parked a street away in the corner of frame, blue washed to gray by the cheap flash, a tailgate sticker half visible, the same brand that showed up later on a cooler in a storage unit. Coincidence bends into pattern like metal under heat. The defense files a motion to exclude the salvage yard records as hearsay wrapped in rust. The judge listens, eyes like shuttered windows. The prosecutor introduces the yard boss as a man whose memory you could build a barn on. He testifies about the comma scar without being asked because stories go where they want. The defense objects, sustained. A jury trial is a choreographed argument. This is the rehearsal where you learn the beats and missteps and the way a single indiscreet word can curdle an afternoon. At high school archives housed in a librarian's private kingdom, Hartley finds a yearbook from 1986. He flips pages, the names fat with the optimism of pen pressure, and lands on a photograph of shop class. Young men squint into a future uniformed in Greece. Jason's jaw is already carrying its punctuation, fresh enough to look angry about existing. The caption says nothing useful. Wrench wizards. But the smile says control learned early and applied often. The sonar crew returns to a different bend in the river, the one fishermen avoid because snags are greedy there. On the screen, a narrow rectangle reveals itself like a secret finally bored of being secret. The diver drops and finds a small safe, not heavy enough to be money important, heavy enough to demand explanation. They winch it up, coax it open. Inside, photographs in a waterproof bag, a habit of those who keep trophies without admitting the word to themselves. The first three are landscapes, places Elise might have walked through on a good day. The fourth is a shot of the viaduct at night, grainy and exact, with a pickup tail light smear like a comet. The fifth is a close-up of the diner's neon sign as it flares and flickers. The sixth, seventh, eighth, faces, women whose disappearances made smaller headlines in neighboring counties. Not dead, not missing, simply frightened on film by a camera held too close. Dates scrawled in calm handwriting. None are Elise, all are practice. The prosecutor's face empties to its working geometry. Pattern evidence will be taught to the jury as comfort, as chorus, as the refrain that makes the verse make sense. The defense will call it fantasy, weaving a net out of coincidences and draping it over a man the town has decided to dislike. Hartley lays the photos on felt and feels an old, familiar nausea that announces itself before logic, a creature that practiced, a hand-stitching escalation one careful movement at a time until the garment fit the night perfectly. At the church where the pastor has been trying to find the volume knob for solace, a woman lights a candle and says Elise's name in a voice like paper. The pastor looks up at the rafters as if the architecture might offer legal advice. He edits again, removes the word closure entirely, replaces it with courage, and hopes nobody notices the substitution because most people prefer the other word, even when it's counterfeit. Jason's mother agrees to talk. Some mothers make their sons' biographies sound like alibis. She does not. She is small and incandescent with the effort not to cry. She tells Hartley about a garage accident at 17. Yes, the scar is a saw without a guard, a teenage job done in a hurry, blood like a lesson. But she also tells him about a boy who found a bird with a broken wing and tried to help and then threw it against a wall when it wouldn't be helped fast enough. He hated the part where you wait, she says, and the way she looks at her hands afterward contains 3 decades of trying to hold something that refuses. The cassette yields one more gift. Between songs 13 and 14, there is a chunk of road noise Hartley can now place like a local weather anchor. A groan that is not engine, not bridge, but a particular grate where the viaduct's expansion joints make a sound like a bad idea slipping its leash. The analyst aligns waveform to waveform, lays the tape's signature over a recording Hartley made last night with his phone when he drove the same path slowly as penance. The peaks match, the valleys nod, and the distance between the diner and the moment on the tape is 48 seconds if the light was green and nobody laughed too long at the counter during goodbyes. This is not proof. This is the kind of cartography a jury respects when someone draws the route on a screen in colors you can see from the cheap seats. A letter arrives at the station, typewritten on a machine that hits the paper too hard, the way fear hits like a blunt instrument. I saw him, it says, in 1991 at the river late. I didn't come forward because I was unkind to the law in those days. No name. A P.O. box for replies if anyone bothers. Hartley writes, because he is the kind of man who bothers. The reply comes folded into an envelope that smells faintly of cigarettes and apology. A meeting in a library parking lot. The witness is an old man who learned sobriety the way some learn instruments, one deliberate day after another. He saw the blue pickup that night because he was hiding from a worse man by hiding in the open, and the river was both sanctuary and danger at once. He saw the driver carry a bundle that looked like blankets. He heard a splash that didn't ring like a fish. I thought, someone's dumping a deer, he says, and then the word fails him, and the library's automatic door sighs open and shut behind them, as if the building is practicing sympathy. The purse gives up a hair trapped in a seam, unremarkable under casual light, insistent under the lab's bright persuasion. It's Elise's, or at least it is consistent enough that any protest must be performed with a straight face. The shoe, cleaned, reveals a scuff that matches the diner's back door threshold the way a key matches a lock it's grown up with. The storage unit receipts draw a shape on a map that looks like ritual, gas bought on nights when the river was loud, fast food wrappers with grease patterns like fingerprints, toll booth stubs that sketch a circle around the viaduct, closing. Hartley sits with Elise's mother at her table, the rosary now a companion rather than a compulsion. He lays out photographs like weather maps and watches the fronts move across her face. She touches the picture of the shoe with one finger and then withdraws it as if she's felt heat. I don't need to see bones, she says. I need to know that the place where she went is not nowhere. The sentence floats in the room like a law nobody thought to write down. At County, Jason learns the rumor about the safe and the photographs. For the first time, something like panic leaks into his posture. He asks for a phone call. He dials a number nobody will pick up because the person on the other end decided years ago to live her life as if the past had died of natural causes. He hangs up and stares at his hands as if they might volunteer a future. The river, insulted by the attention, withdraws into itself for a few days, levels down, patience up. The divers stand down. The dogs rest. The towpath reverts to joggers who run because movement is proof you are not trapped. The viaduct becomes a bridge again instead of a scene partner. Hartley returns at midnight anyway and listens for the unique chord of the grate and the wind and the way water edits sound. He closes his eyes, and when he opens them he knows where to look next. Not for remains, not yet, but for memory's surrogate. Concrete that looks different because someone decided that burial demanded permanence, a pour that never should have been poured. Culverts run beneath this town like a second, uglier river. He walks them with public works maps and a flashlight that throws a clean, radially honest circle. At a junction where graffiti reads like a witness who didn't learn to spell, the beam finds a patch of concrete fresher than its neighbors by a decade. A core sample is taken. The lab sniffs out an accelerant long out of fashion and a sand aggregate that matches a batch bought by a contractor who did odd jobs cheap, no questions. The contractor died in 2008, but his daybook did not. It lists a cash job in late November 1991 for a man with initials JM. Fill work night pour, scrawled as if he was apologizing to the page for working after dark. They bring hammers that speak in syllables. The patch coughs up its contents like a sinner pressed too long at the rail. Not bones, not yet. A chain with a charm in the shape of a crescent moon that Elise's best friend recognizes without needing to touch because she was there the day it was bought with tip money after a shift, when laughter came easy. A set of keys fused by time into an abstract sculpture that once opened the kind of doors Elise had planned on passing through many times. A student ID laminate puckered by heat and then soothed by decades of cold into a rippled mirror where a young woman's half-smile tries to survive the chemistry of cruelties applied in the wrong order. The town inhales again, but this time it doesn't hold the breath. It lets it out slow, a learned exhale, a discipline. Headlines line up with a new certainty. Solved case, darker map. The pastor doesn't edit now. He throws out the page and speaks without notes about how grief prefers verbs to nouns. The fisherman walks to the river and flicks a pebble, not to hear the plunk, but to mark a syllable in a longer sentence the water has been writing for 32 years. Hartley sits in his car outside Elise's mother's apartment longer than is decent because he doesn't have the right pocket to put the words in. Then he goes up, hat in hand though he's not wearing one, and says the thing that is the closest the living get to mercy. We are finding where. She nods and places the rosary on the table like a badge she can retire from wearing. Find enough wheres, she says. And the why stops biting. He doesn't argue. Why never stops biting. It only changes teeth. In the cell, Jason dreams of water and wakes with hands that smell like metal. He asks his attorney what happens if a jury hears a river. The attorney says juries hear people, not rivers, and Jason nods as if comfort has been offered, and yet he can't unhear the great sound between songs on a tape he hasn't listened to in 30 years. He presses his fingers to the comma on his jaw as if punctuation were a place pain can be negotiated. The map on Hartley's board stops looking like knots and starts looking like a path trod hard enough to wear a groove into the floor of a town. He tapes the safe photos at the top, so he's forced to look up at the worst of it before he looks down at the work. He writes another yellow tab in capital letters and sticks it under the earlier question. How? Not the cinematic how. No one needs reenactments. The civic how the investigation missed its second wind in '92, how a napkin needed 30 years to work up the courage, how a town taught itself the spell of deer and fox, and what might be required to unlearn it. Night folds in on itself, and the voiceover doesn't slow. It sharpens, points toward a precinct of the story that has been withholding. A quarry outside town, a receipt that let itself be seen because enough receipts around it agreed to testify, a truckload of gravel dumped where gravel never belonged, and under it a geometry only guilt draws. The cameras, the ones in our heads and the ones with red tally lights, pivot as if directed. The next frame shivers in place, a film gate judder, a thunderhead of realization that has been building since the first earring blinked up from the mud. The river ledger is about to reconcile another column, and the period, if it comes, will not be an end. It will be a door that locks behind the night so the morning has an honest floor to stand on. The quarry wakes like a sleeping animal that has decided to pretend it was never asleep. Dawn lays a pale blade across the cut limestone, and the wind, always nosy at elevations like this, combs the loose gravel into soft signatures that look accidental until you read them like a cop reads handwriting. Hartley stands with a map folded to the square that matters, an X penciled where receipts and radius and the stubborn logic of men who need night poor jobs converge. The foreman opens the gate with the ceremonial slowness of someone who has seen machines eat careless people. He signs the waiver, hands over a clipboard with a pencil chewed to a dowel, and says, "Most folks dump to forget. The ones who dump to be remembered pick the high shelf. Wind scrubs slower up there." A sentence that sounds like both geology and scripture. The team fans out. Survey flags wink like tiny warnings. A drone hums overhead, a mechanical dragonfly mapping this scraped crescent of Earth in strips the color of preparation. Ground-penetrating radar, the diviner's rod of the age, rides a grid with a technician pushing as if mowing, and everybody pretends not to hope for anomalies because hope is a bad coworker, noisy, impatient, always asking for updates. Hartley walks the line where the truck scales spill into a cove. He crouches. Gravel here is a different mouthful, rounder, newer, a batch that never had time to get acquainted with the older stones around it. The invoice from 1991 was for 6 yards delivered after hours. The foreman swears only 3 were dumped on the south run. The map shrugs. 3 unaccounted for. A geometry only guilt draws. They core the spot. Steel tube, ratcheting grunts. The shuck of the earth yielding a clean cylinder of memory. Layers red like growth rings, but something interrupts the rhythm. A ribbon of fine sand wrong for this quarry. A smear of aggregate cheap and sharp. Then a sound that never belongs in dirt. Metallic kiss against the core's lip. Up it comes, cradled, like evidence, because it is exactly that. A rusted grommet from a tarp, bent into an exhausted oval. A zipper tooth divorced from its track. A corner of plastic stamped with a manufacturer's code the lab can date like dendrochronology for trash. Nobody says it, everyone thinks it. This was a place where somebody wanted permanence for the wrong reasons. A backhoe arrives with the patience of a dinosaur. The operator takes bites small as courtesy. Shovelers follow with gentler tools, brushes, trowels, a way of moving that announces, "We are not here to conquer, we are here to unlearn." Within the hour, the ground exhales a shape nobody is ready to name, a corrugation of polydrum in a color now called graveyard blue. The lid bears a crosshatch of pry attempts old enough to be history's fingerprints. A tech taps, listens, taps again, hollow. The silence inside the drum is a held note. They lift it like a contradiction, set it on blankets, and cut around the lid seam with the kind of care usually reserved for crowns and eggs and detonation work. When the top budges, the wind decides not to watch. It gusts, looks away. Inside is not a body, not peace, not finality. Inside is packing, gravel within a drum, a terrible nesting, layers of cloth turned to the consistency of a secret. There are charms of an ordinary life, ticket stubs laminated by seep, a discount card for a store that died before its commercials left the air, a rosary that does not belong to Elise's mother but looks like it might have belonged to someone who needed something to hold. Photographs again, but this time weathered into smudges where faces used to be. A spiral notebook swollen with water to an unreadable loaf. An earring back, Not the one, but a twin from a package. A zipper pull in the shape of a crescent moon. Elise's best friend will put a hand to her mouth when she sees it because she knows exactly how many were sold on the spin rack that spring and how Elise fingered them, smiling, before picking the one that caught the fluorescent least. What the drum doesn't give is the thing the town has been practicing to receive and dreading in equal measure. No bones, no body, not here. Hartley closes his eyes and sees the map of the culvert where the charm and the fused keys and the student ID were exhumed from concrete that wanted to behave like a promise. He allows himself one sentence he never says out loud. He moved her twice. He opens his eyes and makes himself be practical. There is a logistics to erasure. It leaves receipts. At the station, the whiteboard blooms with arrows that aren't metaphors. They're tire tracks written with a planner's hand. Diner to viaduct. Viaduct to motel. Motel to culvert. Culvert to quarry. Quarry to river as decoy. Drum as choir. The safe down current with photographs that flirt with trophy, that document a practice run masquerading as a hobby. A shifting of nouns until the right one lands and refuses to move. Predation. The prosecutor comes in, mid-scribble, tie loosened, eyes on fire the way eyes get when they're close to language the law understands. This drum is enough? He asks. Hartley doesn't answer that question because enough is not a legal standard. It's a word for dinner tables. It's another column that balances the ledger, he says, and it tells us he believed in weight. Jason sits in a room with the acoustic of a confession booth and says nothing. His attorney reads inventory the way an auctioneer reads lots, each item a hammer strike, tarp grommet, zipper tooth, moon pull, waterlogged notebook. The word notebook hangs. You like lists, Jason, the lawyer says softer. You like planning. You like the way a day calms down when you've put its tasks into a column. Jason smiles without heat. Everyone likes knowing what's next, he says, and the room learns something small and enormous at the same time. The notebook dries in a lab's low-hum desert until pages consent to be turned. Ink has wandered, as if letters tried to evacuate when the water came. But pencil is stubborn. It remains. The first legible thing is a grocery list. Tape, bleach, coffee, gum. The second is a collection of mileage notations that match the radius around the viaduct in a way that would embarrass coincidence if coincidence could be embarrassed. The third is a sentence written very lightly, as if the hand that wrote it wanted the words to be optional. Friday, watch the close. Dated the week she vanished, the word close double-lined where a mind circled a ritual and underlined it until it felt true. Community is an organism that metabolizes shock in its own time. At the pizza place that used to be the diner, that used to be the scene where Elise poured midnight coffee for men who thought coffee at midnight was a personality trait, a tip jar collects for a memorial garden that hasn't found its final spot. A teenager drops in 2 crumpled ones and says, "I wasn't alive then, but it feels like I was." And the owner nods because the town has successfully colonized his childhood, and the only correct response is welcome. At the quarry, they find a second drum buried shallow, the lazy impatience of someone who believed the first was enough. This one holds only gravel and cloth and a single license plate bent into a cynical smile. The numbers are a partial that, when coaxed, flirt with a plate Jason reported lost in 1993. The DMV prints the record on paper the color of an old bruise and staples it to a story everyone knows now and wishes they didn't. The public defender sits across from Jason and tries out the angles left to try. No body, he says. No primary scene, he says. Everything circumstantial, Mr. Meyer, and juries, when properly guided, can grow very attached to skepticism. Jason tilts his head as if listening to a polite song. Then, "Do they still do deals?" he asks, when the town is watching. The attorney blinks because it is always shocking when the mask asks about itself. "Deals exist," he says, "but deals have prices." Jason touches the comma on his jaw, a man absent-mindedly checking the punctuation of his own face. "I don't pay for things I didn't buy," he says, which is either defiance or creed or simply the sound of a door deadbolting from the inside. The pastor visits Elise's mother and leaves without praying because some days the holiest thing is to perform an errand. He fixes the broken porch light that she has left on out of ritual for too long. When it comes on, bright and unambiguous, they both look away, as if brightness has become a little indecent. In the lab, the cassette gives up a faint gum snap after the ballad, a small human punctuation Elise's best friend recognizes immediately. She did that when she was thinking what to say that wouldn't make somebody mad. That tiny sound plants a flag. She was there. She was alive. She was negotiating. The analyst aligns the gum snap with the viaduct's iron moan on the tape, and points to a stretch of 40 seconds where the world began to tilt. Later, a jury will sit forward for that. The way people lean when a magician says the next trick will expose how the first one was done. A librarian with an archivist's heart finds a microfilm of the local paper's classified ads from that month and calls Hartley to read one over the phone. Work truck for cash, it says. Blue, reliable, no questions. A number that belongs to a payphone at a laundry that burned in '97. A small ad with the confidence of a trap. The past isn't leaving, it's leaving breadcrumbs. Civil engineers walk the culvert with Hartley and talk about flow rates and scour and the way heavy rains in spring of '92 would have shoved anything not weighted into the wide mouth near the river bend. If something the size of a person was in that concrete pocket, one says, pieces could have disarticulated and traveled a route that is part math, part anger. It is not macabre when engineers say it, only a form of weather report. They draw arrows that look like veins and say words like entrainment and shear, and Hartley hears, almost here, and then almost there, and then a narrowing, and then the quiet. He marks a small ellipse on his map where the river, bored with being interrogated, slows in summer like a sigh. Press conferences are theater with uncomfortable tickets. The prosecutor steps to a podium and measures each sentence against a future he can't see. We have added significant physical corroboration, he says, and the gravitas of the plural we carries the weight of a town that is trying to stand on both feet. Questions dart up. Without a body? Why so long? Is there a plea? Hartley scans the faces and sees the same person repeated with different haircuts. The citizen who wants the story to end clean. He wants to offer them the truth that endings are arrangements, not events. He wants to keep that truth to himself because he is tired of hearing his own voice be the thing between a mother and a doorbell. At sunset, the quarry looks like an ancient amphitheater that forgot its plays. The drums sit tagged, inert now that their contents are cataloged into the slow bureaucracy that turns things into evidence. Hartley walks the high shelf and finds 4 inches deep in the gravel's shoulder, a cigarette butt with lipstick dried to the color of resignation. Bagged, labeled, maybe nothing. Maybe a witness who has been waiting at the bottom of a purse for 3 decades and just rolled into the light. Night turns on, soft click. The towpath has retreated into mist. The viaduct keeps its appointments with wind. In county, Jason eyes the ceiling and tries to decide whether his future is a corridor or a room. His attorney has brought up life without so many times the phrase now has the texture of a rut. Jason dreams in blue, paint chips, pickup flanks, water. He wakes with his teeth clenched, jaw comma sharp, and the word deal, a pebble he can't stop tonguing. Hartley drives to the river ellipse the engineer circled and stands at the edge of a lazily turning eddy. He thinks of the ledger metaphor and rejects it just for a moment because water doesn't keep books, it keeps going. He drops a leaf and watches it negotiate the spin, slide out, coast, catch, release. He hears the tape in his pocket machine, gum snap, iron moan, breath. He watches the dark. He thinks maybe the river doesn't remember. Maybe we're the ones who do the remembering for it, assigning it the job because we can't carry it all. He puts the thought away because it's not useful, and usefulness is how you prevent nights from becoming ghosts that follow you home. Somewhere in town, a kid on a BMX jumps the curb at the old shoe repair place and whoops because gravity lost today. He doesn't know why the storefront window darkens a little early. He doesn't know about 1991. He doesn't know about drums and culverts and commas. But he is part of the organism, and his whoop is a small blood cell carrying oxygen to a place that needs it. In a kitchen, a mother sets 1 extra place at the table because habit is a faithful servant. In a squad room, a detective writes "why" on the board, and then draws a line through it, not because the question is unimportant, but because the next thing requires a different shape. When? When he moved her, when he poured, when he circled back to make sure the river was behaving, when the safe was slipped into the slow part of the current, when a town forgot to ask what it heard because it preferred the song of comfort, and in that shift, from why to when, the voiceover learns a new cadence. It does not slow, it grows precise. The camera slides over gravel and water and paper and skin and stops on the motel vanity's back panel, scarred, unimpressed, still holding the shape of the yank that tore a blouse and started a chronology. The next scene is already choosing itself. A phone call at an hour that startles, a plea that is not confession but sounds like one if you close your eyes, a deal that will not be called a deal, and the hard, ungenerous word a town uses when it is too tired to cheer. Finally, but not yet. The river turns once more in its bed. The quarry cools under a thin rind of night, and the comma waits on a man's jaw like a promise it has no intention of keeping. The phone rings at an hour that makes sentences forget where they were going. Hartley answers with the sound a man makes when he doesn't want to wake the rest of his house. The hush between syllables, a hand over the mouth of night. On the other end, a voice chewed down to the stem. It belongs to a man who once borrowed a truck and never returned the favor. He called me, the voice says. No hello, no preamble, the way people speak when they're trying to walk in front of their courage before it slows. From county, not to confess, to calibrate. He asked what I remembered from that winter. He asked if I still had the thing by the fence. The phrase hangs like a streetlight in fog. What fence? Hartley asks, pen already moving. The quarry fence, the voice says. Back when we were dumb and thought the world was elastic. The thing by the fence turns out to be a milk crate gone brittle with age, stashed in an attic that smells like last year's heat. Inside, a folded tarp the color of industrial denial, a roll of duct tape petrified into a gray fossil, a metal cutting disc wrapped in an old t-shirt with a faded softball logo. The shirt's team name is the diner's nickname from the year they sponsored a league, and there's a grease smear on the sleeve that looks like a shallow handprint. He gave me this for storage, then never asked for it, the friend says, standing 2 rooms away from the crate as if it could spit. I told myself it was camping stuff because that word has alibis. The lab swabs the disc. Time has chewed most stories off it, but near the hub, the steel remembers fingerprints as shallow moons. The partials flirt with a print lifted from the cooler in the storage unit and then stop playing coy. Not a miracle, just the arithmetic of persistence. The tarp has grommets that rhyme with the one pulled from the quarry core, all stamped with the same tiny flaw at the rim. Manufacturing defect is breadcrumb. The tape is a monument to inertia, adhesive long dead, but the cardboard core bears a pencil scrawl. J. 1191. Ownership written like a shrug. In county, the jail-recorded phone calls play for Hartley in a room with carpet that tries to muffle complicated outcomes. Jason's voice on the line is a polite machine, dialing the past with clean fingers. He tells one old friend, they've got pieces, pieces don't add. He tells another, they're romantic about rivers. He tells his mother, they're making a movie out of errands. And she doesn't answer because some mothers know that silence is the only boundary left to draw. In the pause after each call, the tape gives up the sound of his breath, unhurried, a metronome practiced to the tempo of denial. The pastor brings Hartley coffee because sometimes justice requires caffeine from someone who has been speaking to the ceiling lately. He sets the cup down without sitting and asks what he can say that won't feel like he's selling tickets to a miracle. Hartley thinks of the quarry drums and the culvert pour and the motel vanity and the cassette's small human gum snap. Say we are narrowing the dark, he answers, then regrets it because it sounds like a slogan and he isn't a man who likes slogans. The pastor nods anyway, pockets the line like a kindness he plans to return later with interest. The engineer's ellipse near the river becomes a ritual site. A sifting screen stands like a harp over the shallows, and technicians work it with the tender ferocity of people who refuse to surrender adjectives like minute and trace. What they find are the small nouns grief learns to worship, a button with thread still pinched in its eye, a zipper tooth that marries another zipper tooth by shape and stubbornness, a bone fragment not much larger than a fingernail. The anthropologist on loan from the State University speaks softly but without sedative. Human, consistent with female, not a conclusion, a step. The town hears the word human the way dry ground hears rain-hit tin. Elise's mother stands at the edge and doesn't step closer because the body remembers geology. It knows when to lean and when the bank will betray it. She watches the sieve lift, tilt, let water go, keep silt, keep what the years couldn't finish. She doesn't ask for details. She asks for the feeling that the river will not retain ownership forever. Hartley doesn't promise. He says instead, we will read it until it speaks. She nods, accepting a vow that is mostly labor, and the least romantic sentence becomes the holiest thing in the room. Gene, the ex from Arizona who once watched Jason's jaw comma flash in the rear view as he said, "You ask too many questions," sends a padded envelope because she is done with the witness protection program run by her own nerves. Inside, a Polaroid of a blue pickup's bed lined with a tarp precisely the wrong color, a gas receipt tucked under the visor with a date that scratches Hartley's map like a talon, and a handwritten note. He liked bridges, said they made the night feel held up by something. The handwriting slants uphill, the way you write when you want your words to climb out of a room. The defense, already tired of losing ground they can't name, files a motion to exclude the jail calls as prejudicial ambiance. The judge, amused against his will, denies, then lectures both counsel on the difference between theater and trial. The prosecutor smiles the kind of smile that has lost teeth and learned to bite anyway. He is assembling a narrative that prefers verbs that don't end in "ly." He wants his story to walk into the jury box and sit down without being asked. Hartley returns to the motel for the 4th time, not because he expects the room to grow new corners, but because repetition sometimes dislodges the thing that has been pretending to be furniture. He stands at the vanity, the torn wood like an old mouth, and lets the room play itself on loop. A faint scratch under the lip of the counter, an etching that looks like idle vandalism until you hold a mirror to it. The scratches resolve into a date and an initial carved backward so the mirror throws them forward. 11, 16, and JM. Scrape marks on ceramic, shallow, impatient. A man bored by waiting, marking time. The mirror hands the past back like evidence. The quarry foreman calls to say a worker turned up a 3rd drum in a shoulder nobody respectable uses. This one is empty except for stones and a bent pry bar with a hardware store sticker mostly intact. The barcode can still be read, the kind of administrative immortality that scares criminals and comforts auditors. The sticker's store is the same that sold the cutting discs. The register tapes confirm a purchase with cash in the hour after midnight, 2 days before the night the town won't stop measuring. The owner remembers the buyer by posture. He stood like he trusted the floor not to argue, the sort that tests stools before he sits, not because he's scared they'll break, because he likes to know. The lab finally woos the Waterloaf notebook into legibility 1 square inch at a time. 2 pages surrender a block-printed list under the title, Rehearsal. It is not a confession, it is worse. Park, light, approach, talk, move. Next to talk, a parenthetical, she likes songs 3, 7, 11. Those are tape tracks. The lab prints the pages and Hartley stares at the list until the ink pretends to quiver. Ritual exposed as inventory. Jason requests a meeting. He asks for Hartley, specifically because there are always 2 rooms in a case, the courtroom and the room where 2 people decide what the courtroom will be allowed to know. Hartley sits, tape running, and waits for the pronoun that matters, I. It does not arrive. Jason refers to himself as the man they want, as the driver, as the person of interest, as if grammar could shield him. You think you know because you have fragments, he says, careful, fingers resting near the comma, like the way a man hovers his hand over a stove to feel if a burner still remembers heat. Fragments make mosaics, Hartley answers, tired of metaphors and yet married to them by trade. You can help decide the picture. Jason's eyes slide to the corner, a tick of someone who prefers exits. What are they offering, he asks. Hartley doesn't play ghost lawyer. Truth, he says, and Jason smiles as if he's been handed a sermon. Truth is expensive, he says, and the room's temperature drops as if winter has been called into service. The attorney clears his throat and starts a sentence with the word if, which is a lid you put on boiling water when you're not sure you're making soup or steam. The fisherman who heard a fox the first time and then owned the correction returns with a metal detector he borrowed from a nephew who uses it to rescue lost rings from gullible beaches. Along the bank near the ellipse, he teaches the device the shape of its own patience, sweeping, listening for the tone that means useful. It finds pull tabs and nails like a museum of junk. Then a tone that is neither celebration nor disappointment, something in between, something exactly human. He kneels, an ID badge clip, rusted, stubborn. The lab will marry it to the ripple on Elise's student card the way you marry faces from 2 family albums that didn't know they shared a roof. In the pizza place that used to be the diner, a woman looks up at the television where a bar at the bottom crawls with the case's name like an ant that refuses to stop. She remembers coffee poured by a girl who called everyone Han because it made the night easier to carry. She signs the Memorial Garden petition and writes a note in the margin. Benches, please. Someplace to sit without feeling watched by the river. The safe photographs become a seminar in intention. A pattern expert stands in a conference room pointing at the way the camera moves closer to faces over time, teaching escalation to a room that would prefer optimism. This is not souvenir behavior, she says. This is rehearsal. This is control learning its muscles. The prosecutor stares at the blue tack on the corkboard and refuses the prayer to unsee. Control is the word that has been playing bass under the melody all along. Hartley and the anthropologist stand in the lab over the bone fragment like 2 astronomers over a small light from a far system. DNA will be an ask, a maybe. The kind of yes that arrives with caveats pinned to its lapel. But there is shape you can't mistake. The angle that tells thigh, the density that tells adult, the cellular pattern that whispers woman. He feels relief that embarrasses him because relief feels like cheering for a bad thing to be confirmed. He files the embarrassment under unavoidable. The court calendar lands its blows, suppression hearing denied, trial date tentatively carved into a month that still seems hypothetical. The town marks it anyway because marking days is how we put a fence around fear. The pastor stops trying to craft the right metaphor and instead tells people where to sit, where to bring food, how to sign up for childcare, how to carry each other in practical units of time. Logistics is love. At midnight, Hartley goes to the viaduct alone. Because some assignments refuse company, he sets his recorder on the railing and plays the cassettes in between again. The breath, the gum snap, the iron moan. He lets the night layer its current sounds over the old ones until the two tracks almost sync. He closes his eyes and a picture rises. Not a body, not a face, but emotion. A hand flicking the radio down, a palm settling on a gear shift like a claim, a head tilted to listen for a deer that is not a deer. He opens his eyes because there is a limit to how much night a mind can hold at once. A patrol car rolls by slow, the officer lifting his palm in that old, useful gesture. I see you. You're allowed. Hartley nods and pockets the recorder. On the way back to the car, he sees a penny in the gravel, tamped flat by tires, embedded like a timeline in the path. He doesn't pick it up. Not superstition, recognition. Some offerings are better left as markers for the next person who needs to know they are not the first. In county, Jason dreams a courtroom with no doors. He wakes to the fluorescent noon regret that passes for day in those blocks and asks for his attorney again. Deals circulate like weather fronts you can feel in your bones. Outside, the quarry sleeps with its drums tagged, its high shelves quiet, its fence holding a view that keeps trying to forget it ever mattered. And still, a call will come. A tide mark will show where the river dropped and revealed a shape the color of decision. A witness will walk in late, paper shaking in his hand, and say the sentence that moves a string on the board half an inch closer to the center. The voiceover doesn't announce it. It anticipates, breath held not out of patience but momentum. We have narrowed the dark. We have not reached the wall. The comma on the jaw waits, stubborn as punctuation in a sentence that refuses a period, and the town, fully awake now, keeps reading. Snow threatens but doesn't commit. The sky hanging an unfinished sentence over the town as if punctuation could be negotiated. In the lab, under lights that burn certainty into everything they touch, the anthropologist lifts her gaze from the bone shard and nods once, a motion that feels like the hinge of a door. Mitochondrial DNA, the inheritance that knows which kitchen table you came from, offers a whisper that becomes a word when matched against a swab from Elise's mother. Not courtroom thunder, not the kind of proof that strides in with banners. A quiet yes that holds. Human, female, consistent with Elise. Hartley hears the verdict of the living, relief braided with rage, and lets his hands rest against the stainless as if he's returning heat to the material that has made his days unseasoned. Across town, a grand jury listens in a boxy room where the air smells faintly of toner and sharpened pencils. The prosecutor lays out the mosaic in the calm cadence of someone who has made sure each piece knows where to sit. The earring clasp, the motel vanity's mirror-etched initials, JM, the backward scratch reversed to face us. The salvage yard's ledger with its hook-tailed J and a foreman who remembers the way a comma scar can underline a face. The trunk, the purse, the shoe, the cassette with its gum snap and iron moan, the storage unit cooler stuffed with paper that learned to swim, the quarry drums, a nesting of intentions, and the culvert pour that tried to teach concrete to forget. The grand jurors nod at different moments, their heads tipping like metronomes set to individual tempos. Indictment moves through the room with the inevitability of a season. A signature, another, a third. Ink performs its old magic. It makes thought heavy. At county, Jason's attorney lays the news down in tidy parcels, each wrapped in optimism he can no longer source wholesale. They have enough to bind, he says, and Jason watches his own hands as if they might startle and confess without consulting him. They always had enough to bind, Jason answers, voice sanded smooth by repetition, the kind of tone you develop when you practice a lie as if it were an exercise regime. The attorney starts again with the word deal, and Jason looks at the ceiling like a man deciding if a leak is worth a bucket. The river drops 2 inches overnight, a barometric shrug, and reveals a litter of small honesty along the engineer's ellipse. The sifting team returns as if called by a bell, only they hear. A button with a floral emboss that matches the pattern of the torn blouse. A keyring hoop that marries the fused keys from the culvert by diameter and insult. A small, smooth stone, bore drilled and strung once as a charm, the kind of thing you buy at a fair because a girl at a booth says, "Try it on," and you do, and suddenly you own an object designed to watch your life from your wrist. Elise's best friend kneels in the cold and says, "We spent 3 minutes choosing that and 15 minutes laughing at our taste." And the memory arrives whole, a warm object that refuses to harden into evidence. The pastor stops writing metaphors altogether and starts making lists. Casseroles scheduled, rides to hearings, a quiet volunteer with a toolbox sent to fix the latch on Elise's mother's screen door. Logistics is mercy, he tells Hartley in the hallway outside the lab, and Hartley nods because it is true, because the small acts stack into a bulwark against nights that won't be still. In the pizza place that used to be the diner, a thrift store television leans into a corner and broadcasts The Crawl, trial date penciled for spring, motions in Lamine sprouting like early weeds. The owner turns the volume down to a murmur, the way people do when the news is a neighbor at the threshold. Teenagers compare the voiceover of their own days to the one the town has been living inside. They measure themselves against a date in 1991 they were not present for and feel present anyway. History is invasive like ivy if you let it be, and the town has decided to let it climb. A letter arrives, stamped in a state where Jason never lived. The envelope is trembling before anyone touches it. Inside, a woman's handwriting that survived 3 name changes and a decade of silence. She worked nights at a different motel then. She remembers a man with a comma on his jaw and a way of claiming space merely by standing near it. She remembers him asking for room 12 specifically because the sink's good for cleaning up messes. She remembers a girl with dark eyes stepping through the door the next afternoon to ask if anyone had turned in a scarf. She remembers telling her no, remembers thinking the girl's smile looked like someone had taught it to be careful. "I didn't know who she was until the news," she writes. "I kept quiet because I learned too late that fear is a kind of employment. I'm resigning." The lab coaxes sound out of silence one last time. Between the cassette's tracks, 1, 7, 11, the ones he had circled in his notebook under rehearsal, there's a faint rhythm that no one had isolated yet. The echo of a turn signal, 3 clicks, pause, 3 clicks. Hartley drives the road again with his ear tuned like a thief. There's only one intersection between the diner and the viaduct that demands that rhythm if you're counting down under your breath. The timing places a vehicle slowing exactly where the blue pickup was ticketed that week for parking wrong. The defense will call it epiphania. The prosecution will call it choreography. Public Works opens a manhole with a shrug that says the city's veins are everybody's problem. Down in the cylindrical cold, the air tastes like iron filings in old rain. A footing shows fresh concrete from the era of Elise's absence, an ugly patch where the pore's texture refuses to match its older neighbors. The core sample returns a breadcrumb, a strand of polyester married to a whisper of cotton, the hybrid fabric of a blouse that sold for $12.99 in a chain store that no longer exists, but will never die in memory because grief keeps it open. The lab aligns the weave with the motel vanity fabric and the quarry drum lint and draws a line that looks like persistence disguised as thread. Jason files motions through the attorney as if paper were his real language. Change of venue, denied. Exclude the cassette, limited. Exclude the bone, laughably denied. He watches the judge's jaw and tries to read in the muscle a future that spares him. He tells himself the town is biased. He tells himself the river is biased. He tells himself bias is a product you can return for store credit if you keep the receipt. He has kept all his receipts. Hartley has them in bins labeled with a patience that feels like resignation's kind cousin. The safe photographs, those faces taken too close, those landscapes chosen to be seen later by one set of eyes, find their way to women whose smaller headlines lived and died in neighboring counties. They come in one by one and sit in a room with cups of water and a box of tissues no one is required to touch. They look at images of themselves, younger, startled, and they speak in the tense that trauma uses, present. He is behind the camera. He is closer than I want my future to be. He is practicing. Some add, he never touched me like a spell. Some add nothing, because silence is the only angle left in their memory that doesn't cut. The quarry foreman finds a receipt tucked into a clipboard he hadn't touched since he stopped believing clipboards held back chaos. The date is a day after the night that will not stop placing itself on calendars. It lists Mia C. Holloway night, cash, no returns. And the signature box is a diagonal slash imitating a name. On the back, a doodle of a bridge that looks exactly like the viaduct if you squint through exhaustion. Hartley pins it to the board not because it is legally delicious, but because it is spiritually precise. He is building a chapel of small certainties around a larger doubt. A jailhouse confidant tries to barter by offering a story in which Jason confessed twice and repented not at all. The prosecutor listens with a face made of granite and salt and says he does not purchase testimony retailed out of a commissary debt. The man leaves muttering the names of his own needs. The town hears about the attempted bargain anyway. Rumor moves through vents and under doors, and feels briefly sicker then steadier, like a body rejecting a toxin. Elise's mother receives the mitochondrial result with a nod that looks like the crest of a very small wave colliding with a rock. She does not weep because the body learns how not to in order to stay inhabitable. She asks one thing: to stand alone for 1 minute at the river's edge without the ritual of cameras. Hartley bothers to arrange it. The crew steps back, the techs look away, the rope line slackens. She stands, the water busy nearby like a clerk, and whispers a thank you that is not gratitude for what happened, only for someone bothering to listen long enough to hear the piece of her daughter the river allowed to be named. Trial prep slouches toward its choreography. Jury questionnaires ask what people believe about water, about absence, about DNA, about the difference between a story and proof. The defense team pincushions consultants onto a board: linguist, memory expert, metallurgist with a soul soft enough to bend toward ambiguity. The prosecutor sharpens: timeline, mapping, pattern analysis, a demonstration with a cassette deck that will not hum for spectacle but will insist on being heard for what it is, a container for breaths that did not know they would someday be evidence. Night, and the viaduct has a brief tantrum of wind, a tantrum that rattles the gratings and sends the sound across the water like silverware gathered in a drawer and shaken. Hartley stands with a cup that used to hold coffee and now holds a habit. He thinks about commas, about the scar that is both pause and warning, about the way this case has refused a period as if a sentence could keep the dead nearby never finishing. He wonders if the end, when it comes, will sound like thunder or a door clicking shut softly, finally correcting the grammar of a town. A new witness arrives not because of the news, but because of a photograph in a church basement, an old softball team, the Diners League, shirts with the faded logo that matches the tarp rag from the friend's attic. She points to Jason in the back row and says that after games he liked to drive the loop by the river and spot broken things he could fix: a railing that needed a new screw, a sign that sagged, a life that did not consult him before choosing a direction. He kept a list, she says. He liked lists. The notebook's rehearsal page smiles from the evidence folder without humor. Snow finally begins. Tiny, unserious, the kind that pretends it's not really here. It finds the quarry in a hush that makes machines look contrite. It dusts the towpath and erases footprints without asking permission. It seeps into County's courtyard and makes everything briefly new, as if fresh paint were a meteorological event. Jason watches it from a window with wire diamonds soldered onto hope. For 1 second, he sees himself in a truck cab driving a route that feels inevitable and therefore innocent. For 1 second, he feels the tape click between songs and hears a gum snap that does not belong to him, and thinks absurdly that he might yet decide to be someone else. Then the snow stops pretending and falls for real, and the fantasy closes its eyes. The anthropologist calls in the evening because bones respect no schedule. Another fragment, this one from the Eddie's sieve, aligns with the first along a jagged seam like 2 sentences spliced into a paragraph. There is a respect in the room that looks like silence devoted to a craft. The lab tech who started her career photographing thumbprints on beer bottles presses her palms to the bench as if steadying the earth. Hartley takes the news to Elise's mother with his coat still buttoned against the flurry. She opens the door before he knocks the second time, as if they have learned each other's weights on the stairs. He says, "We are building her back from the river's edit," and hates the phrase as soon as it leaves his mouth. She forgives him with a glance. "Do it kindly," she says, "and if you can't, at least do it completely." He promises the only thing that never becomes a lie in his work: we will keep going. The pastor finds a way to speak that doesn't taste like hope or defeat. He tells the town that closure is a headline word, and what they get instead is continuity, which is the scar of a healed wound that still itches when weather changes. He asks for shovels when the memorial plot is finally permitted. Benches, yes, and a slow path, and a little brass plaque that will tell strangers what we already know. A town can learn to carry a name so gently that it never falls. Trial week appears on calendars, black letters printed over a month that seems less hypothetical now. The prosecutor rehearses the way a turn signal will sound coming through the courtroom speakers. The defense rehearses how to look puzzled without looking cruel. The jury pool fills a lobby with the rustle of winter coats and the noise of civic ambition. Someone drops a penny and nobody picks it up because the floor is crowded and moving and the coin looks content for the first time in years. Night lays down with more intention, the snow a steady whisper. Hartley drives one last loop before sleep that he will not be allowed to keep. Diner turned pizza, closed early for the storm. The salvage yard fence wearing white like a half-hearted truce. The motel sign buzzing under a haze as if neon can run a fever. The viaduct delivering its iron vowel to the river hearing and not responding because water does not answer to this world's grammar. He parks and sits with the engine ticking itself cooler, and he measures the distance between solved and found on the back of an envelope because sometimes you need a number to tell you what a feeling won't. He writes one more yellow tab when he returns to the board, the last open space under where and how and when. He prints it with the precision of a man aligning a frame, who we are after. Because the trial will do what trials do, call witnesses, display objects under the bright, hungry eye, argue over the meaning of a pause and the weight of a scrap, and then the town will have to decide how to live with a sentence that ends not with a period but with a breath. He presses the tab into place. It sticks. The snow outside keeps its appointment with the night. The comma on the jaw waits in a cell for its day to pretend at being an end. And the voice goes on, steady and cold and human, narrowing the dark a little more, promising nothing but the next inch of light.